Hi, this is Chris Tatala, aka Galleon Unlimited, and this is Found in Translation, a podcast focused on fan translations from Japanese into not just English, but many other languages. And I've got as a guest today Benoit from Quebec, and Benoit was able to translate all of Phantasy Star IV into French, which I just find like super interesting and super cool. Would you like to introduce yourself and just
All right. Thanks for having me first. I'm very glad to do this. I live in Montreal, Quebec. I'm a programmer by day, which I guess helps when you're trying to translate fixed problems and the translation, window sizes, and that kind of stuff. Other than that, yeah, I guess I'm more or less a regular guy who started doing that mostly for my own daughter. I don't know what else to say here.
yeah, yeah, perfect. Um, and yeah, that's part of why I wanted to start this podcast was to kind of just showcase people who are doing all kinds of like hundreds of hours of work behind the scenes just for something that they're passionate about. And I am not a programmer. I'm only a writer and an editor. So I had to rely on help from many people to get my relocalization done. And just want to just like encourage people like, hey, if there's a game that you really love or a project that you just haven't seen happen, just, ask around a little bit, and whatever skills that you bring to the table might be really helpful to someone who's doing something that you don't even know about. So since we are focused on Phantasy Star, I always like to ask people first, like, what makes Phantasy Star as a game series so special that you wanted to translate it into, your preferred language?
As far as Phantasy Star itself goes, I always found it pretty cool universe. My first exposure was way back when there were video stores and you could actually rent out games. And you can imagine Sega Master System games. So this gives you an idea that I'm not exactly young anymore. So, anyways, at that time, we had this cool video store. They had all sorts of weird tapes of all sorts of stuff, but they were also one of the few ones that had Sega Master System games. Because for some reason, my parents had decided, to not give me an NES, which everybody else had, and would have allowed me to get lots of friends. Instead, I got a Sega, which nobody wanted to play. But that was fine as far as it goes, because it did let me discover other games that nobody else knew about. So the Phantasy Star, it was pretty expensive at the time, so I never actually bought it, and I never actually finished it. I just remembered I got it once, and I spent the first week just trying to get out of the freaking city because it's brutal at the beginning, that game. Like, it's very hard to advance, and I couldn't do anything, but I found out that there was a save slot on it from somebody else, and I started playing that one. And he was already all the way to having the rocket ship and being able to go between planets. And I thought that was just so very cool. Like, you change a planet, the music changed, you had a new environment. I liked the graphics, I liked how it was. I didn't know English all that well back then, so I was a bit confused about it, but there wasn't tons of dialogues either. So if you're just imagine you're plunged in the middle of Phantasy Star, you kind of don't know what's going on. So I never rented it again. So that's a bit anticlimactic. But I did remember it. I did remember that it seemed like an interesting mix of sword and sorcery and technology. So fast forward bunch of years, I finished university, I moved out of my parents, I live alone, and I have some time on my hands, shall we say. So I bought Final Fantasy VII on a whim PC and played it, and I absolutely loved it. Lousy translation and all. And I didn't know about.
In French, is that right? It did get a French translation.
It did, but it was awful. But I actually bought it in English. I went to English university, so by that time I didn't know English. So when I started with Phantasy Star 1, must have been 8 or 9. Like, I don't even remember. But I was very young, so I was just starting English courses at grade school, and those weren't, very complete. But by the time I was at university, I was pretty much fluent for various reasons. But overall, I ended up buying it in English, and I absolutely loved it. So I started playing on looking for other Final Fantasy games and playing them on emulators. Yes, I know. I did not have the cartridge. I'm sorry. Uh, I since bought licenses to those on different platform. But anyways, I was out of university. I wasn't necessarily that rich at the time, so I went and played those old Final Fantasy, and I remembered Phantasy Star, and I found Phantasy Star IV. And I played it after having played, I think, Final Fantasy VI and IV, and I really loved it. I mean, I was blown away by the game. It was just very, very, very nice. The amount of dialogue for one, because a lot of people remember Final Fantasy VI as being very good, but it's actually not that dialogue heavy when you think about it. There's not that much banter. If you talk to NPCs, they just, they don't have that much to say. If you look in cabinets, it certainly doesn't say anything, whereas you're constantly admonished in in Phantasy Star IV, which I really thought was a nice touch. And I really liked the overall structure of the story and the idea of this ancient civilization that fell from grace in a way, and that everything's going wrong on the planet and nobody quite knows why. So it's actually relatively advanced science fiction concepts when you think of it, especially for a game that was, at least in North America, more or less marketed to children. And then I guess I tried Phantasy Star 2, and I could never advance much in it because it's it's even more brutal than Phantasy Star 1.
Oh, yeah.
So that's basically how I personally got interested into the series. So why I wanted to translate it, that's actually not for myself, because obviously I played the whole thing in English. I didn't like the translation all that much. I felt it was a bit lackluster, but I felt that for every RPG of that era. So it wasn't anything special, and I didn't think of actually translating it. So what happened is sometimes I get into those odd conversations with my daughter because I'm an hopeless geek, and somehow she humors me. And I started telling her about this game and how awesome it was. And she's like, "But Dad, I don't understand English." And I thought, well, you should learn English. She said, "Yeah, but that's going to take a long time, and I don't know English all that much." And around that time, I think it was on the PSK forum, I saw Laurie's post about having disassembled the whole game. I was like, so I got the game, and I saw that he had the text, he had a version with the uncompressed text and a version with the compressed text. So I got the version with the uncompressed text. Like, you know what? I could, just translate it for her. So that was just it. I mean, I just decided to translate it more or less on a whim. I didn't have that much to do once she was asleep. I was mostly spending time futzing around on the internet and whatnot. Why not do something creative, and do something for her that she would enjoy?
And how old was she about that time?
She was 8 at the time.
Oh, okay.
When I started. So I started, and now she's quite a bit better in English, but not enough to figure it out still, because it is a complex narrative when you think about it. So I ended up translating it, and I started working on it for a while, and I gave it to her, but she wasn't that interested because since she was 8, she couldn't understand English, and she also had not that much patience at the time. She started getting more patience for RPGs when she got into Pokemon, the Pokemon RPGs on Game Boy Advance and DS, and then she got it out of the how can I say that? Like she dusted it off, if you will, and started to play it again. But so that's basically how I started the translation. But I think the translation was really just a translation for her, and it wasn't especially polished. So I ended up doing that. I added accents because my first draft didn't even have accents. I just translated every letter down to an accented letter because, of course, in French we have those pesky accents, right? Which we don't have in English. And then I added accents. That was pretty much it. And the script was kind of rough, but it was enough to understand what was going on. While doing it, I did try to make it a little bit better because, as I mentioned before, always, I was always a bit disappointed in the script in the original US English version.
Yeah.
That's more or less how the project started. And I sort of left it there. There were some windows that were too small, so I just kept everything in capital letters, like in the, for the magic names or, well, technique names and for the skill names and whatnot. So I just kept it to the original look and feel, if you will, and didn't bother too much with anything else or the mechanics or fixing bugs or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened a bit later is there's another person from France, in this case. I don't know if you'll interview him eventually, maybe, whose handle is Galeteux. And I started seeing posts on his forum where he was talking about translating this. And I didn't think that much of it because I didn't know how serious he was. Because at the time there had been a start of a translation and sort of petered out. Like nobody did much of anything with it. And I think it was only 10% translated. They were having trouble with decompressing the dialogue and they sort of left it at that. So since we had the disassembly, he started to work on that. And the disassembly, he started to do his own translation. And then he talked to Mziap, who you definitely know about. This guy from Poland who pretty much name comes up for everything, for every damn translation in the world. So he referred me to him and vice versa. And we started talking and he looked at my script and was, yeah, I think your script's actually more, advanced and you did more with it. I want to help you finish it and polish the whole thing.
Oh, cool.
So then I had motivation because as I mentioned before, my daughter was sort of not playing it that much in the end, but then he was playing it and he really wanted it. Okay, we'll be the first French translation and let's finish this up. So one thing to led to another, ended up fixing window sizes. He recently also proper cased everything, spells and whatnot. I ended up fixing the title screen. I used a picture from the old translation done from the French team and in France that never finished, but I asked them for their image and I repatched that in there.
I have to ask you about that because I never figured out how to do that in my patch. So all I did was add Phantasy Star Generation 4 to the opening story crawl, but I've always wanted to. I've seen so many awesome ROM hacks where they have that credit on the title screen, and I'm envious that you know how to do that stuff. So I will be asking you about how to do that. So continue, sorry.
Okay. Well, yeah, and then towards the end of the project, the kind of culmination, I guess, is that I decided to make it a proportional font version for the dialogue. But that was sort of a challenge to myself. I just wanted to do that just because. And that's that. That's pretty much how this whole project got started. Now, I mean, we're not working on it at this point. Maybe we'll... because it's essentially complete. Maybe there's a couple of typos left. If somebody finds one and tells us, sure, we'll do another patch. But, most of the work has been done. I still have this wild project one day of taking your translation and seeing if I can improve mine from that, because I entirely base myself on the US dialogue. Since I started at the time, I don't think your version was out yet, or it was just starting. I just picked whatever was there and tried to translate it the best I could and make it a bit more, alive. And I wanted the character's personality to come out more. That was the main thing.
Yeah. There's a lot of debate, about like localization versus translation, and there's people who want as close to the Japanese as humanly possible. Like I'm more of the school of, how can I give the speaker in my language as good as or a better experience as what the Japanese got. And I'm not super like, oh, I must stick to the script. I must say exactly what the Japanese said. I approached this using the site, the Cutting Room Floor. We're lucky that they compare early versions of the of the English script and to the Japanese with notes on the Japanese, and I kind of meshed all these together to make what I just hope was a better, just like better speech patterns, more natural to the English speaker. And I'm not shy about adding in small things that don't contradict what the original Japanese makers did, but expand upon character personality traits and things like that. And the localizers, did, I'm sure, as good a job as they have, but they, were doing a commercial endeavor. I'm sure the entire Phantasy Star IV English script was done in Japan. Clearly, there's a lot of English in the final script that we have, and they just didn't have the time or the resources to devote to, polishing it a little bit more. And as fans, we have all the time in the world. I mean, you've seen, your patch was done before mine was, and still getting people still finding typos and stuff. This kind of like never ends. But we're fans and we care, so we can kind of put that never-ending time into these things, I suppose. So
Well, I mean, I don't want to rag on the original translators. It was a different time, and we're lucky we got the translation we did because it was actually understandable, eh? And I don't say that lightly. I mean, Final Fantasy VII is notorious for having an especially typo-riddled and confusing translation, and still a game that's very fondly remembered. In the case of Phantasy Star IV, I think we got a very good job overall compared to the standards of the time. And nowadays it's different. Nowadays, like, everything's localized from the get-go in a zillion languages. First of all, there's space. Second of all, it's easier. I mean, you don't run into the issue that, well, if you want to do the US version, it's more characters. So, oh, well, we need an extra, like, it can be a 3 megabit cartridge and more has to be 4 megabit. That's like $20 extra. So we don't have those problems anymore,
there are people who are like, oh, I must have, the original script, or, oh, you strayed too much like from the English that I'm really familiar with or whatever. But yeah, I'm just more of the school is like, oh, like, this is good. How can we make it better? So even the future, that's exciting that, we could swap notes. And that's even part of what I was hoping would come out of our podcast is getting into a couple specific instances that could kind of maybe tell the story about how French just as a language is different from English, and which of course are both really different from Japanese. And maybe by making some information about, how did you handle this? How did you handle that? It can give me more insight, into the English script, to have someone who, took the scenario and how does that translate like into a foreign language, and that can help me like maybe look at it a different way. Along those lines, I just had like a couple. Like I try not to get too inside baseball with these, but they usually end up going that way anyway because I always have a lot of technical questions for like that a hardcore Phantasy Star fan would only really care about. Are any of the other classic Phantasy Stars available in French?
Well, not officially. There's a bunch of fan translations. Actually, some of them I actually didn't know about, which is shame on me because they were sitting on because the French community have their own ROM hacking site, but it's not managed the same way as romhacking.org. It's more moderated, I guess, and I think the problems of moderators, they're now older, so they're doing their best, but sometimes they don't update stuff right away. It's not as automated as ROM hacking, where they have a bunch of moderators. You put stuff in the queue, they look it over, say yes, and then that's it. So they have to manually put it in and whatnot. So sometimes the email gets lost or whatever. But in any case, yes, somebody did translate Phantasy Star 1 in French. I did not try it, so I have no idea how it looks. Apparently, there's a relatively complete Phantasy Star 3 translation, and at least that one I have screenshots, so it looks decent, even though the word breaks are a bit weird sometimes. There's a very, very partial Phantasy Star 2 translation in that there's no accents whatsoever. So I'm pretty sure
Okay.
Yeah, I think actually they did only the intro text and a couple of things, like not even the full dialogue is done. However, there are complete or fairly complete translations of PS1 generations and PS2 generations on PlayStation.
Oh wow! I think did those come out before the English versions, the remake French versions?
Actually, I believe so, and I'm not sure what the whole history was, but from what I could gather on the PS Cave stuff, those actually came out sort of before, and the main hacker for it actually supported the English version for a while, and then life intervened and whatnot, so the main hacker sort of disappeared, so they're sort of stuck, at least for the English one. And the French one works, but I think it doesn't work in the real PlayStation. It only works in emulators. Or maybe that's for the English one. I don't recall exactly.
The English one, fortunately, does work on real hardware. It might not have always, but they do now, which is nice.
Okay, maybe they did fix it.
Okay, yeah, man. That's awesome. I remember when the French one came out, and as a spoiled English speaker, of course, I was like, wow, I can't believe there's not an English version out yet. And there's a French version. But thankfully, we can all enjoy the Phantasy Star remakes now. Are there any other PS related resources that you would like to see someone try to translate in French, like the Phantasy Star Compendium, or I don't know, any of the side games or anything?
Well, I think the usual problem for French translators is that a lot of them understand English too well. So humans being as lazy as they usually are, they're like, yeah, this looks hard to translate. To do it, you must really, really like the game and you must really, really want to do this. In my case, I had an external motivation, which was my daughter, and then my colleague who went and, sort of pushed me into finishing this and making it as polished as possible. But other than that, as I said, I understand English well. So unfortunately, if there's an English resource, like, yeah, I don't need this in French particularly. I mean, it would be nice for people who only speak French, but it's not of particular use to me. And I don't think my daughter is enough of a Phantasy Star geek to want to read the compendium. Maybe one day. Maybe she'll surprise me and learn Japanese. You never know.
I've studied Spanish when I was in high school. Just like a lot of kids who just take a language, like a lot of Americans just take a language, like as a class without intention of like really getting fluent in it. I really did enjoy it, but my interest in the language kind of stopped from there. After I visited Japan for the first time, which I've been lucky enough to do twice, after the first time I got a private tutor and worked with him for a year. So, just like every kid like growing up playing RPGs, it's like, oh man, I'd love to learn Japanese someday. And getting a look at Japanese basically has given me enough of appreciation just how different languages are, and there's so many nuances that just cannot be translated literally. So I do not have any experience with French, but I wanted to ask: could you think of any in the Japanese script, Dazorians and Motavians? So like Palmans are like the humans. Dazorians live in the snow planet. Motavians live on Motavian, or kind of like weird, like little Ewok thing. They each really basically have like different languages, and PS4 just kind of takes the lazy way out and just lets you talk to them without like an item or anything. But the Dazorians, at least, were supposed to have an accent in kind of all the games that they're in, and the English Phantasy Star 2 basically just makes them talk kind of like country hicks, like hayseeds. They just say like darn instead of like darn it, or they say like ain't a lot, or like yeah dig instead of like do you understand. The English PS4 did not really attempt to translate this at all. They just talk like normal people. And in fact, one of the characters that you meet, who even has a dialogue box, is Gyuna, who's a bartender and a good friend with one of your party members. He's supposed to have a really thick Dazorian accent. And for my localization, the closest thing I could come up with to what they did in the English Phantasy Star 2 was I live in Cleveland, which is in the Midwest of the country. Pittsburgh is only like 2 hours away. They just have a specific way of talking that you really just have to hear or like see on the internet, some of their like isms to like understand it. So did you having a difference in Dazorians and like their accent, or did you not worry about that?
Well, I did do something for Gyuna because I thought it was really silly that the game said he had an old-fashioned accent and then he doesn't. I mean, I always thought that was like, why do you translate this? Like, obviously you're translating line by line and you don't consider the context of the game. Like when you do something like this, how can you miss that? So that's a bit of an insight, actually. That's where I started drifting out of translation and into localization. I gave him actually a Quebec French accent.
Oh, cool.
So, and that's kind of, and that's sort of a bit of a joke. Like, I think Quebecers would get it better. Unfortunately, I don't know if there's many Phantasy Star Quebec fans, but I think it's more popular in Europe. But technically Quebec French evolved from an older version of French when the French people came here to live. One of the not so nice ways some French people characterize a Quebec accent is to say that it's an old-fashioned. They say it's ringard, like so. They actually say old-fashioned accent in Phantasy Star IV. So I thought it was perfect to give the guy like this really heavy Quebec accent. But there's no such thing as written Quebec French. So it's just phonetic. So I thought, yeah, maybe the French won't understand. So it's actually a compile time option. You can turn it off if you don't understand what's going on. But I haven't had any complaints so far.
Oh man.
So maybe nobody. I hope people are playing it, and it's not because nobody's playing it, but it does have quite a few downloads already. So I guess nobody complained too much.
Yeah, that's cool. And those are the kind of stories like I really like to learn about. Like when something was translated into another language, like what does that say about their culture, and how just how just do people relate to each other basically. So yeah, that's pretty smart. That's perfect. In mine, my wife is from Pittsburgh, and I also it's the same thing. There are slang that and like a speech pattern kind of that Pittsburghers use, but a lot of it doesn't come out unless you just like write it phonetically. So I made it like the characters, are like having a little hard time understanding him and stuff. And the way I did it initially, like both my editor and my wife were like, I have no what the hell does it say? Oh, maybe I should trim it down like a little bit. Maybe I went a little full working designs here, and I scaled it back. And I have someone who's like a very purist because I did a new submission that this is like a final-ish version of patch. I've been saying that for half a year, but I got a couple new people playing it who wanted to be like very close to the Japanese, so they're almost at this part. So I'm really interested to hear what they have to say on that. Yeah, cool. That is an awesome example. So Raja, who's got all these like bad jokes and stuff, and a lot of them just flat out were not translated into our localized English version. Were there any like jokes or lines of his that you had either problems with translating into English or really had to, into French, or you just did your own thing with it because the English doesn't even try to handle it?
Yeah, that was a bit of a pain. I did not actually look at Japanese script, or well, first of all, I don't understand Japanese, so that doesn't help. But I didn't look at the translation notes either, because at the time when I started this, I was just, my first pass at translation. I just went through the whole English script and just translated everything in one shot, and it was kind of this thing I wanted to end relatively quick because my daughter was bugging me to play it, and then she didn't finish it. But that's another story. So she's just that way. Like she'll bug you for stuff, and then like she doesn't finish it. That's very typical of her. So yeah, so those jokes. I just tried to make them puns as well. They don't make that much sense in English either. The ones that didn't make sense in English, I didn't try to make them make. I think there's one I tried to make it give it more sense a little bit, but it was a bit painful. There was one here, like they say, Android, the droid, whatever, and I never could find what's funny about this. So I don't know. I just said Android, andouille, peu importe. So andouille means stupid. So I just put that here because it sort of looks like Android, and I think mine's a little bit better, I guess, for that. But and I think there were a couple. One I couldn't translate well. There's this whole two fists is the best situation, and then later it's like two squared is the situation. I don't know what that is in Japanese, and probably you could tell me because you probably read the liner notes. But that's when I didn't translate it to anything really interesting. So I'm not too proud of that one because I couldn't come up with something. So it's something like two heads are better than one is more or less what I said to the first one. The second was like, okay, you need one head instead of two, which is kind of the reverse of the other one. So it sort of fits, but I'm not too proud of that one. But there is one I'm proud is. There's this whole passage where he gets about this sort of poem, like snow is the best blow, for then affection grows. Then we huddle so tight on long winter nights, etc., etc. So the nice thing with this one is I went with a bit of a double entendre, if you will. Like it says, la neige blanche favorise le frottage des hanches. So the white snow, encourages rubbing hips, obviously together. So it was sort of, I went a little bit further. And I guess it was supposed to be, well, I don't know. I haven't read the Japanese one, but I felt that sort of fit the character well, the old man who, when he's sick, he's sort of happy to have nice nurses around him and whatnot. That's such a typical Japanese anime stereotype anyway. So I thought that fit well with Raja.
Definitely Raja, and I didn't go like too far out there with the English, but yeah, it's clear in the English that yeah, he's like, he's giving the nurses like a hard time. I just expanded on that a little bit to make it a little bit more same thing, like in that vein. So, but yeah, it's definitely the right choice.
Well, there's sort of a second meaning there, and I thought that was perfect for the guy. Oh, and there was one other thing that I had a ton of problems translating in such a small thing, and it's very hard. Like, there's this ice digger. It's like there's no such thing. You can't say a creuse glace in French. It doesn't make sense. And on top of that, it had to fit in the damn menu. So I had so much trouble with that one. And we ended up, my associate and we ended up with croque glace, which is like ice eater, more or less.
Oh.
And then croque is CROQUE. So we ended up dropping the U and the E in the menu so that it fits. But, people, since you never have something ending in Q in French, people can sort of figure out, okay, that's a croque glace, because otherwise that's the only thing that it could be, given the French letter use rules, if you will.
Because the Japanese names are kind of like strange. The original ones are like weird. It's like flow mover, I believe, is the hovercraft, and they call it either a hydrofoil.
Yeah, that actually exists. It's a boat that's on skids that lifts it out of water. So that sort of fits it. Yeah.
I definitely didn't know that as a little kid, and I did not know that as an adult. So in the English, in the Phantasy Star 1, part of my goal with my project was to, even though I'm not really that familiar with Phantasy Star 1, because I had an NES and not a Master System, although my friend did, I just felt it was important because the developers put so many callbacks to PS1 in PS4. I just think it really sucks that so many of them were just not localized at all. So I try to use the original Master System English names, which were Japanese is Landmaster. It's called Land Rover. Yeah, Land Rover in English.
Right.
Hovercraft instead of hydrofoil or flow mover or whatever. And then it's not even ice digger. It's something the original ice thing is, but I believe it was ice digger in English. So that's what I went with. That's cool. Were there any other items? Because so long story short, the technique names the people who translated the Phantasy Star remakes discovered that the technique names are basically all Germanic in origin, and that's why they didn't know even how to translate them into English, let alone translate them with the 5 characters they had to work with. So that's why all the technique names, much to the bane of classic RPG speakers even today, the technique names just make no sense. They're like foy, etc. So with those kind of choices, so you got mangled English, from the original Japanese, which is Germanic in origin as it was. How did you go about translating the technique names and stuff and magic?
Well, originally I didn't even, because I felt that most people probably had played it in English anyways, and that would just confuse them. So that's sort of how I was like, yeah, it's true that it's so hard to. But then there was this guy on the forum who had this very complex compendium on the Trap forum. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll do that later. But then my associate went and decided to just translate them all on his own. So, okay, I just picked what he did. So he tried to pick synonyms, like, for instance, for fire, for the level 1 spell, it's like hot. The second one, it's burn. And the third one is like flare, more or less.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So he just tried. Initially, it was like fire 1, fire 2, fire 3, and I sort of bitch at him. I was like, yeah, that's not great, like
Final Fantasy. We don't need that here.
Yeah, exactly. So he opened this synonym dictionary and found a lot of stuff. He did an awesome job at this, because a lot. I was looking at this. Wow, how did he think of this? But now the annoying thing is that my daughter actually having a hard time with that version, because she learned all the original names and now she doesn't know what is what.
Yeah, geez. That's pretty cool. That's like Dragon Warrior 1. It was hurt and hurt more, and heal and heal more. It was an interesting solution to spell progression. One thing that I offered, if I could help with the retranslations again of the Phantasy Star remakes for PlayStation 2, Phantasy Star Generation 1 and 2. And my first version of my PS4 patch actually did my best to link the technique names up to what they used in the Gen 1 and Gen 2 patches. And they, of course, like had more space. So my like level 1 was like, Flare or whatever that they used. And like instead of Zan, there's this like Zon. I don't know. In retrospect, it doesn't like work that well in the 5 character limit, and a bunch of people were just like, "Oh, this is. Can I just have like the original English technique names that are gibberish and make no sense?" So I just acquiesced, and now that's my preferred version of the thing. And it's been really interesting to read, to get comments and feedback and stuff, and discover what people prefer. Basically, in terms of people who had played the game, and in terms of people who are just trying who aren't like Phantasy Star veterans, and they're just like trying this game, and they both have like really different takes on what they want to see, like from these like, weird technique names and stuff. Well, for now, we're getting to the stopping point for our first session. I thought I had another question that I was going to ask you, but I've forgotten it. So yeah, in terms of just general like Phantasy Star and the universe and like very top level of why you did the project and stuff like that. I don't know. Is there any other thoughts that you had or anything that you wanted to communicate about like the world of Phantasy Star?
Uh, well, I mean, the main thing again, like why it blew me away, and I think it's still unequaled in any RPG. Really, it's this feeling of history that you get in Phantasy Star, even though they sort of screwed it up with Phantasy Star 3. But it's so unbelievably epic. Think about it. Every 1,000 years, something awful happens and civilization collapses. Well, okay, not quite in Phantasy Star 1, but starting Phantasy Star 2, that's what's going on. And the stuff that happens there, it's so dark when you think about it. I mean, this stuff was marketed for kids. It just blows my mind. I find it's just a bit unfortunate that the early games are so archaic in a way. And there are some modernization patches which I keep meaning to try, because in terms of storyline and scenario and whatnot, it's pretty darn awesome. And I wish we'd see more of that in games today. I mean, the Final Fantasies, they're all more or less standalone, except if they try to milk, they try to milk Final Fantasy 13, so they do a 13.2 and plus and whatnot. But they're sort of side stories, and there's nothing all that epic about it. But this kind of scope, I think, okay, I haven't played that many games, but seriously, I think the thing that came closest is probably the Mass Effect series. Mm-hmm. And then that happens in a relatively short time of like 3-4 years. That freaking Phantasy Star is like 3,000 years.
Yeah.
it's nuts when you think about it.
Yeah, the more that I look back on these games, because I started with 2 and 3 when I got my Genesis in 91 as a kid, then I didn't even actually own Phantasy Star 4 until way later, but my friend bought it, so I got to play through it. And then, of course, I played 1, an emulator, and then I finally played 1 again just this year, thanks to the 2.0 Phantasy Star 1 retranslation patch, thanks to SMS Power. And it's just, into video games, I'm like kind of an amateur video game historian, because I was born in 82, so I kind of like, feel like I have grown up with games. And I cannot think of like a better story that spans multiple games than Phantasy Star. I love Nintendo too, but I'm a big Sega fan, and I'm always kind of a fan of the underdog as it is. I'm like Rick and Casablanca. I always pick like the losing side. And part of why I wanted to do this stuff too is I think Phantasy Star, there's a lot more in the script than what we got as English speakers. And because the series has devolved into like an MMO, and it's like super cutesy and like Japanesey and stuff. And it's just the original games, they're really important, and they're can still be made fresh by people like improving on the game, because the core of what is there is just like so cool. So yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's the best story like in retro gaming, basically.
Right, absolutely. Well, okay, maybe I don't know all the stories in retro gaming, but
yeah,
it's the one that blew me away the most. I mean, it had concepts, and it dared stuff. Maybe 4 didn't dare as much. It's kind of a more mature game in the sense that all the concepts were worked out, and they just sort of completed the story. But 1 and 2 dared a lot, and 3 even dared a lot. Unfortunately, it wasn't that great, but
a great concept. And
amazing concept.
there's a new retranslation of Phantasy Star 3 that is kind of like in beta right now.
Yeah, they have to do something about the music though. It sounds like you've dropped a record on the floor while it's running or something. Uh, especially the combat music.
Yeah, well, this is a good stopping point. Been a while. If you want to, we could figure out when we could pick it up next time. And the second session I wanted to ask was more of like, no, I'll figure it out. We covered a lot in this one, that some of it which I didn't expect to be able to cover, so I appreciate that. And yeah, and I got to add this one other big question that I really wanted to ask you about anyway. So yeah, cool, man. Thanks